So there are 3 points that are in this verse, but first of all, let's get a bit of context of where we're at. So we're in the conversation between Kapila Muni and his mother Devahuti. And she's inquiring. The student inquires. Right before this, she asked, how is it that we can get free from illusion because it seems like it's binding us? And I think that question is quite relevant, at least for me, being in this material world, material consciousness. And Kapila Muni, he answers several things, but he really emphasizes being serious in devotional service, not just taking it lightly. And he also says that we should so Krishna says, or Kapila Dev says that we should hear from and about Krishna for a long time. And he also says that it takes lifetimes, which might be a bit discouraging, but then we have Prabhupada saying that we can do it in one life, so then it's like, yay. And then he also says, he uses that it's like we have to wake up from a dream. And so I thought that was a really interesting analogy, which is used a lot, in Jeev Jago, and this concept of waking up from a dream. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so this new chapter is called Kapila's Instructions on Devotional Service. And I was like, yay, we're going to get into devotional service, because Sankhya is quite like, whew. But then, when I started looking at all the verses in the chapter, I'm like, wait a minute, Kapila Dev's like talking about yoga, mainly. He's actually describing in detail Vishnu or Paramatma, because that's who the yogis are meditating on, so it's quite a beautiful meditation, so that's something to look forward to. And then the next chapter, Devahuti keeps on inquiring, which is what we hear in this verse, you should have a spiritual master which we worship, which means we worship their instructions, and we get their instructions also by inquiring and get knowledge. So she's inquiring about devotional service specifically. And that's the part of this whole Leela where Kapila Dev starts saying that you can execute devotional service in different modes. And that's also something I find fascinating, because I thought, okay, devotional service, we're in the transcendental platform, but then you read about that, you're like, oh, maybe I'm practicing in the mode of ignorance. What are my motivations internally for executing devotional service? So that's also very important for our spiritual journey, to kind of take note of what our internals are. So that's kind of like the context. And if we can understand what pure devotional service is, then we can aspire for that and strive for pure bhakti. So coming to this verse, there's 3 elements in this text. One, that we should prescribe our duties, and which here Prabhupada's saying is our varna, and we should do it for Krishna. That's the main point. That we all have different abilities and in this body and things that we're inclined to, and we're going to do them anyways, so might as well do them for Krishna. That's basically what Krishna says to Arjuna as well. You can't stop being a warrior and go meditate, because you'll end up being kshatriya somewhere or the other, protecting people and stuff, so better do it for me. And there's a whole seminar that Arjuna has uploaded in Mother Urmila's YouTube channel that's all about how to understand our Varna and seen from many different angles, which I hear the word Shakti is actually to the best of one's ability. So we really want to, do them the best we can to please Krishna. And I think it's interesting, the word Shakti, because usually it's translated like energy. So we all have this Shakti that Krishna has given us to achieve different services. It's quite empowering. We all have something we can give to please Krishna. And the second point, Prabhupada doesn't go so much into it in the purport, which is to be satisfied with the material gain that comes from Krishna. I think mainly it's to not get distracted or misled of having a different goal in our lives, because many people in this material world, their goal is, economic development and sense gratification that you can get from economic development. So I guess the point is that's not our goal. Our goal is to please Krishna. So to not get, carried away in that artha and kama. And then the third point is to worship the spiritual master. And how do we worship the spiritual master? If he's present, we can worship, his form when he comes. We can, worship him. But also, like Manamango was saying, we hear their instructions and we apply them. So it's quite simple in a sense. We put them into action, and we can hear their lectures or like hearing Prabhupada's lectures and try to understand their mood, so we can actually be a disciple and fulfill their desires and please Krishna in that way. I've been meditating a lot on Srila Prabhupada because I'm reading this book. Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, A Friend to All. It's so amazing. It has like all these devotees that interacted with Prabhupada before he went to the West. And there's like this, usually what comes up is they're always saying how Prabhupada was so serious. He wasn't wasting time. He was like, he was always focused. And he was always engaging in Krishna Katha with his godbrothers. And he always had the, order of his spiritual master in the front of his consciousness, and always meditating on how to execute the order of his spiritual master. Because most of the people, the devotees in that book, are saying how Prabhupada told them that he had to go to the West. So he had that really present. Somehow or other he was going to go there. And yeah, it's very endearing, that book, because you learn more and more about Prabhupada and how he dealt with each person, and he's very kind and very compassionate and very personal. Yeah. So that's an example. Srila Prabhupada, he's always worshipping his spiritual master, and he says, he's never without his spiritual master. He's always with him. And that's also I just finished reading Bhagavad Gita with Baba Sandhi yesterday, and it's interesting, at the end of Bhagavad Gita, the conclusion is, what's the last thing that Arjuna says to Krishna? Do you remember? I want to get the exact words. So it's text 73. Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, O infallible one, my illusion is now gone. I have regained my memory by your mercy. I am now firm and free from doubt, and am prepared to act according to your instructions." So basically that's the conclusion. It's like, I'm going to do whatever you want, Krishna, not what I want. and then the last line of the last purport that Prabhupada writes, I find so fascinating as well. By proper use of that independence, he comes under the direct order of Krishna. Thus he attains his normal condition in the pleasure-giving potency. So that was so cool. So Arjuna is saying his illusion is gone because he heard from his spiritual master, which in this case is Krishna, and our spiritual masters are all external manifestations of Krishna, and he wants to act according to Krishna's instructions. And he attains the normal condition, which is to be in the pleasure-giving potency, not the pleasure-taking potency. I was thinking that this morning when we were dancing, and I was thinking, I should be dancing for Krishna's pleasure, not for my pleasure. And it becomes very different. It's actually very sweet, and it's counterintuitive, because you think that if you want pleasure, you try to get it, not to give it. But somehow, the more you're trying to give pleasure to Krishna, the more you feel satisfied. And I think all of you have this experience. But it's just important to remind myself that that's how to be satisfied. So, like we were saying before, that Kapila Muni said in the past chapter that it's like we're in a dream and we need to wake up, get free from this illusion of thinking we're this body and this mind, and wanting to satisfy the body and the mind instead of the self. So I think it's like when you wake up, usually you take a bath. And so in the same way, we're washing our body, we should also take a bath for our soul, our consciousness. And I feel like for me, it's Shastra. Shastra is the actual shower that resets my consciousness to what I'm supposed to be doing and how I'm supposed to be approaching my life. And so we do it every day, we take a bath every day. So the ideal is to also, hear from Shastra every day, and if not, at least regularly. Baba Santi was telling me that's my shelter, but maybe other people have other shelters, which is true, but I'm gonna, share my shelter. And if others find they have other shelters to connect and to reset their consciousness, that's fine as well, and it's great. But I know that Prabhupada wanted us to study his books, and that's why he took so much effort into writing them. So we can remember our normal condition, which is to give pleasure to Krishna and not to take pleasure from Krishna. So it's kind of like an internal shift that we try to do all the time. We're going to use our bodies anyways, but instead of trying to get satisfaction from what we're doing, we're just trying to give Krishna satisfaction in our varnas. I guess, it's mainly for grihastas, because the grihastas are the ones that are engaging in varna. Also, I'll read this later. Yeah, and because I was saying it's an internal path, I also just finished reading Manashiksha, the book that Madhuryamrta compiled. And when you read that book and you see how all the anarthas we have are displayed and how to get rid of them, and you can see that you can't fake bhakti. Because Krishna is in the heart, and he knows what we're trying to hide and what we don't want to deal with. and so it's a very purifying book, and I feel like I have to read it so many times, because the end of the book is like when you're basically self-realized. I'm like, oh, I'm not there yet. I'm still like in verse 3 and 4. So it's a book that you read a lot, and basically it's trying to help us develop our relationship with Krishna, our internal relationship with Krishna, by trying to get rid of the things that are being obstacles. And I was also thinking how this point has been coming up a lot, that Krishna is interested in our intention and our sincerity, and not in the results. Hare Krishna. And there's that name for Krishna, Bhavagrahi Janardana. I couldn't find where it is in the Bhagavatam, but I did find in Mukunda Goswami's website, he shared a letter that Prabhupada wrote to Mandali Bhadra in 1965, and he wrote, "But in everything we do, devotion and sincerity are the real things. There is a word in Sanskrit, Bhava Grahi Janardana. This means the Lord accepts service in devotional emotion. If we are sincere in offering something to the Lord in devotional love, He will accept it. The procedure may not be very right, but the desire, being sincere, He accepts our offering. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, that He accepts foodstuff from devotees because they're offered to Him in complete love and affection. And I just wanted to talk briefly about Yamuna Devi at the end, but while I was doing a little bit of research, because I was trying to find this that I had read in her book, but I couldn't find it. She was recorded by George Harrison. I don't think she even knew that she was singing the Bhaja Hure Mana, but she was saying it the other way around, Bhaja Mana Hure, and that's the recording we have. And when she told Prabhupada, or Prabhupada found out, he didn't mind because the devotion was there. So this is a really good example of what Prabhupada's saying here. And also, in Krishna book, I was just reading about when Krishna goes to King Bahulashva's house and to Shrutadev's house, the Brahmana, and the king has so much paraphernalia and opulence that he can offer to Krishna. And Shrutadev is just a Brahmana, but Krishna's equally satisfied by both offerings. It doesn't really matter the externals, it's the mood. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm so not civilized, I wouldn't even know what to do if Krishna comes to my house. Offering sandalwood and all these things, and it's really sweet. And they're both like in ecstasy, just like seeing Krishna, the Lord of their hearts, in their house. And Krishna, he reciprocates. And it's amazing that Krishna consciousness is alive. It's not a static thing, it's dynamic. So the more we put our heart into our devotional service, the more we can feel Krishna's reciprocation. And I felt it yesterday. It's a bit, So it was 7 o'clock at night and it was raining, and I was so attached to seeing Krishna because I had made the garlands for the disciplic succession. I don't know if it happens to you, but when you do something, you kind of want to see it afterwards. And so then I was like, okay, Nainamani, we're going to go up the hill in the rain. We put our jackets, and it was just like with the umbrella. Maybe it's not a big deal, but for me it was a big deal, and she's heavy, and I was carrying her up the hill. And I finally got here, and it was so nice to be in the temple and see Krishna. And Mataji was doing the arti, and I was staring at Krishna, and then suddenly like one of his mukut things fell, and I was just like, oh, that's cool. And then Mataji, the Pujari, was saying like, oh, he's reciprocating or something. Anyways, it's nice. Krishna's there. Krishna's there, it's not a statue. And I feel like when we switch to autopilot, we kind of miss out from the realness of Krishna consciousness. Yeah, so that's a point I wanted to focus on. And also, we're hearing, that we should hear from our gurus. And in Bhagavatam, I was reading yesterday the pastime of when Dhritarashtra quits home. I don't know if you remember that Vidura, he was sent away because of the harsh words of Duryodhana, and he went and he met Maitreya, and then we read about it, in Bhagavatam. And he comes back, and he just starts giving it to Dhritarashtra like hardcore. And I was reading this yesterday, and I'm like, oh my God, it's like talking to me. And he says, insurmountable, eternal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and are always engrossed in their thought. And I was like, oh my God, it's so easy to be absorbed in our little worlds. And then time just passes by. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, I am now happy. I have everything in order. My bank balance is quite enough. I can now give my children enough estate. I am now successful. The poor beggar sannyasis depend on God, but they come to beg from me. Therefore, I am more than the supreme God. It's like really intense. And he says, these are some of the thoughts which engross the insanely attached householder who is blind to the passing of eternal time. And then he starts talking about how, time is passing and you can't even pay millions of dollars for a second that has passed. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, I should be more, attentive to how I use my time. It's so valuable, especially because in this point in our spiritual journey, we all have access to knowledge, we have access to service, to sadhu sangha, to deity worship, all these things. So it's so valuable at this present moment in our sojourn. And it's like we can't waste a moment. Yeah, anyway, so that was interesting how the Guru is also heavy and it's necessary to wake us up from our illusion. And yeah, we can perform service at the temple and serve the deities at home. I was thinking of the 5, elements that Rupa Goswami says in Nectar of Devotion. We've got access to Bhagavatam, to Shastra, to Sadhu Sangha, like I was just saying, to the holy name, to the holy place. We can come to New Varshan, we can go to Vrindavan, to deity worship. And I was remembering how Prabhupada said, correct me if I'm wrong, that washing the floor that was like, checkered black and white marble is the same as bathing Krishna Balaram that are black and white marble in Vrindavan. Because, like we were just saying, Krishna likes the bhava. It's not about like the service itself, but it's about our emotion and our wanting to please him. And finally, the last point I wanted to focus on is that also the end of Bhagavad Gita is quite important. The 18th chapter, the end of the 18th chapter, there's so much in there in each verse. And one of them is that who's most dear to him? The person that shares Krishna consciousness. And I'm thinking, we all have different natures and the way of sharing can be different, and that's fine. Some people might find it, like you have all the brahmacharis in the ashram, they go out on book distribution daily, and that's amazing. And maybe for other ashrams or lifestyles, there can be other ways of connecting with the Sankirtan movement, but it's got to be there somehow, even if just by donating, but that helps as well, because, means are necessary to spread, or by cooking for programs. And I was thinking, there's so much preaching that can go on in the Indian community, and I know that it does, having home programs. And for Westerners, maybe it's easier to just connect by doing programs at the loft, or with Madhava Sangini, we're doing this kirtan program here in Kumu, whatever. Somehow try to connect in this Sankirtan movement, because that's how we get the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. And that's why I was remembering Yamuna Devi, because I couldn't find it, but the Prabhupada told her that she had to share her knowledge in cooking. Do you remember how he said it? Because if she didn't share it, then she'd become miserly or something like that. Or yeah. Sorry? Better? Bitter. What tastes of bitter? I don't get it. No, maybe she would become bitter. Oh, she'd become bitter. Anyways, the principle is that what we have, we can give. And the more we give, the more we understand what we have and the value. I don't know if you've had this experience, but talking with someone that doesn't know anything about Krishna consciousness, and we start sharing and you start seeing their enthusiasm, you become more enthused. I was like, wow, this is amazing what I have. I was recently, when there was only, you can only gather 10 people in one place, now it's 100, but we had a program at the Seva Ashram in the city, which is basically Manjaranya's house. And there were guests there, and one lady, she's been, I don't know her age, maybe 40s, 50s, I don't know. But she's had the Bhagavad Gita as it is for years. And she starts to read it a little bit, but then she stops and she just can't get into it. And obviously, it helps if you have a devotee reading with you and you can discuss it and try to delve into it. But then afterwards, there's this Vaishnavi retreat that just happened online, and one of the Vaishnavis, exalted Vaishnavis, is Pranada Komtwa, and she's a Prabhupada disciple, and she wrote this book last year called Wise Love. And it's basically explaining Bhagavad Gita for a Westerner for this time. And I've been hearing her audiobook, and it's amazing. It's just so accessible and poetic and beautiful. And so I recommended that to this lady. And I was thinking, somehow or other she has to, she can connect with Krishna. And then afterwards you can, read Bhagavad Gita by Prabhupada, because kind of like you have more of a grounding on what is bhakti and stuff. And so I was thinking, this devotee, she's been thinking about making this book for years, and that's her offering, one of her offerings, for preaching. It's revolutionary to have something so well done, and for the audience of 2020. Yeah. So we're now coming out of the lockdown slowly, and so somehow or other we can ask Krishna, ask Lord Chaitanya how we can assist in spreading his movement of Krishna consciousness, and so then we can please Krishna that all his spirit souls that are now on the planet can have an opportunity to connect with him. Because most of the people in this world are in ignorance, and so it's our kind of responsibility. I was actually reading it in this part, Prabhupada's purport, that when Vidura was instructing Dhritarashtra, is saying that it's his responsibility to wake him up, and for us as well, it's our responsibility to do whatever we can, meditate on how we can do it, somehow help this movement flourish and bring people to Krishna's lotus feet. So yeah, that's my meditation, and I wanted to share with you. So any comments or questions or corrections? You always have a comment.
We just listened to our presentation, just sort of summed it up in what's the Hindi that we can all do something to assist.
We have this Shakti.
We've got this Shakti and different instincts and skills, and we can just figure out how to assist and how to move the best thing for ourselves and others.
Yeah. And that's what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said to Prabhupada, that it helped him as well, and he'd help others if he preached. Yes.
How to serve Krishna? How you get to the downtown people?
If you?
Those who are very, they are not getting food, So whether it is serving to Krishna or not.
So what? Sorry.
So people are very distressed, like during COVID, Corona, people are unable to get food, and there's so much suffering from the people. So if you serve to the people, will it be a serving to Krishna?
Someone asked the same question to my Guru Maharaj in his lectures that he gave when he was here.
We are spending so much money to the temple, we are giving to the temple, and some question comes against the temple. Many people see how they are spending money in the temple, but here people are not able to get the food, the basic things.
Yeah.
So how we see this? How to serve Krishna?
Yeah.
Which will be the better?
Yeah. That's a very relevant question, and I ask myself as well, and I discuss it with friends and with my husband, and because the thing is that we're seeing the suffering of the body, and we also need to see the suffering of the soul. It's a whole package. So we can help the body, but we also need to help the soul, and that's why we have prasadam distribution, which is both. And I was actually talking about this yesterday was it yesterday or the day before with Baba Sandi, and I was saying I want to, kind of help with Food for Life, because there we're doing both. Because, there's always going to be suffering in this material world. Always. That's part of the package. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he actually told the Grihastas when they were in the Holy Dham to not be miserly and to give donation to the people, the bhaktas, beggars that were outside the temple. Because if not, our heart becomes hard. But at the same time, we also need to understand that you can, that saying, you can teach someone, you can give them fish or you can teach them how to fish or whatever. Anyways, I don't know if that's relevant right now actually, but what I'm trying to say is that you want the people to come out of illusion as well, not just like get food today and stay in the material world and then become a pig in the next life. It's just, so we want to help holistically. I think that's kind of the answer that my Guru Maharaj gave when that question was asked. Doesn't mean that we don't want to help the body, and he always says that if someone hurts their arm and the doctor fixes it, you don't say, "Who cares? I'm not the body." You say, "Thank you," because it's part of our vehicle that Krishna has given us to serve. So in the same way, we do want to help others, but we need to focus our energies in trying to help not just the body but also the soul. And as Grihastas, we're the ones that are actually, giving most of the charity because we're the ones that have the varna that are making the money. And so, it's something that everyone should ask themselves, how can I help as best as possible?
What is my view that if the government is responsibility of the government also, because of the government's irresponsibility, the people are suffering. So if we make that Krishna consciousness, I have seen a doctor or in a government employee who is really Krishna consciousness, he knows that how his duty should be, how he should do his duty, and how he can help the people.
Yeah.
So otherwise, what I feel that if we all become Krishna consciousness, so we can help the people.
Yeah.
Even the government, they are not Krishna consciousness, so they don't do their duty properly, so they don't serve the country. So that is the way the people are suffering more.
Yeah.
So that's why I think Krishna consciousness people spread, and a lot of high position people, and they are very helping different ways. So that helping mind comes when you are really Krishna consciousness.
Yes. You're reminding me that Prabhupada actually, he wrote to politicians and said that they should institute Sankirtan. And I'm trying to remember. I have really bad memory, but one of the accounts in this book that I'm reading about Prabhupada, he actually did something in a jail. Prabhupada got the people in the jail, the prisoners, to chant, and the behavior changed a lot. And he was trying to show how it affects. I'd have to look it up because I can't remember because there's so many stories, but it was to show like a politician how Sankirtan just solves everything. There's harmony and there's peace because, the soul is connected to Krishna. So that's the highest. But Krishna, he doesn't want any of us to suffer or any of his living entities. So if we have that mood that we're trying to please Krishna by helping others, then Krishna is pleased. But we also have to remember that the others are not their bodies, they're their souls. So we've got to help the package if possible, somehow. Or at least have that intention. Yeah. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.